Now, making the decision to work in Sri Lanka is undoubtedly not a light concern. It's a very serious decision. And our first panel presentation and discussion today will be with recent returnees who will take you to the many considerations they had to make from multiple angles before making that crucial decision to return to Sri Lanka. Moderating the discussion is Arj Wignaraja, who is the founder and managing director of the Asia operations of Remote Sensing Metrics, a US Sri Lanka company that provides proprietary reports to Wall Street investment firms and retailers based on high-resolution satellite imagery. He is also a senior advisor at Stax Inc., a global strategy consulting firm, and formerly served as a founder and managing director of the Colombo, Sri Lanka office. Prior to returning to Sri Lanka and establishing the Stax Colombo office in 2005, Arj served as a director at the Stax Chicago office. Prior to joining Stax, Arj was with the Boston Consulting Group, where he helped formulate business strategies for Fortune 500 clients in the financial services and industrial goods sectors. Arj holds an MBA from the Kellogg Graduate School of Management at Northwestern University and a BA in Economics with honors from Princeton University. It's indeed a pleasure to have you with us. Over to you, Arj. A round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen.
Morning, folks. Delighted to be moderating today's returnee panel, and we've got a motley crew of interesting people who've returned to Sri Lanka and hopefully will be sharing their experiences with us. So the process is we will go through, invite each of them onto the stage, and once everyone's there, we'll do a quick introduction from each of them about their role and the companies they work with, and then we'll get into the discussion on why they came back, some of the opportunities they have taken advantage of, some of the challenges they have faced, and obviously any words of wisdom, advice for folks who are thinking about coming back. And then we will open up to audience questions at the end. So to start off, our first panelist started her career in broadcast journalism and obtained a degree in that field from the UK. She then switched careers into the creative agency field, where she served large global clients also out of the UK. Back in Sri Lanka, she has continued her career in the creative agency field, and she's also created a festival for electric peacocks. So that should be something we'd love to learn more about. If we could have Leah Bazalgette on stage, please. Our second panelist is an IT and telecom executive, been there for 15 plus years. Started his career at one of Sri Lanka's largest IT companies, which enabled him to travel the world and serve global clients. He then spent some time in the UK working at one of the largest telcos there on digital products before returning to Sri Lanka to focus on a problem that we all think about every day, which is middleware integration. So please welcome Shevan Goonetilleke. Number 3 on our panel certainly has got Intel inside him, having spent 9 years with that organization, developing next-generation firmware and hardware. He picked up a PhD in electrical engineering and an MBA from the US before returning to Sri Lanka, where he now leads the effort to develop Sri Lanka's first electric car. Please welcome Dr. Beshan Kulapala. The next panelist may be considered a god of small things, since he has a PhD in nanotechnology and has several inventions to his credit. Back in Sri Lanka, he has taken on the challenge of being both a research scientist and a strategist in the field of nanotechnology. Please welcome Dr. Shehan de Silva. And our final panelist has over 8 years of experience carving out a successful career in the testosterone-filled world of global investment banking in London, where she helped structure mergers and acquisitions in consumer and retail spaces. She picked up a master's from Cambridge and an undergraduate degree from LSE before returning to Sri Lanka to continue her career in banking. Please welcome Inoshini Perera. Right, good. So if we could start by just setting the context, I'd love to have each of you talk a little bit about the roles that you're playing in the current organizations that you're with, just to set the context and the background. Start with you.
I'm the co-founder and director of the Electric Peacock Music Festival. Not for peacocks, just the name. But that's more like really my night job, because that's a passion of mine, and we started in 2010, and it's an annual music festival. But by day, I'm the director of Grant Group of Companies, which is the largest advertising integrated communications agency in the country.
Hi. Check. Hi, I'm Beshan Kulapala. I work for CodeGen International, and we're developing a high-performance super car. It's all electric, and we hope to compete with the Ferraris and Bugattis of the world.
So I'm not yet. Okay. So I'm Shevan Goonetilleke. I'm Senior Director Engineering at WSO2. So WSO2 is basically a technology company. It's been around for over 9 years now, and we developed open source middleware products, mainly focusing on enterprise integration. So we have a platform that is widely used across the globe now, even with companies like eBay, Boeing, Cisco, Trimble, Fidelity Investments, etc., who all use some of our products for enterprise integration needs. And I think one of the good examples is eBay uses a product called Enterprise Service Bus. So most of your transactions that you do on eBay go through products developed in Sri Lanka. They run 6 billion transactions on a daily basis. This is all software developed here in Sri Lanka, designed and developed right here in Sri Lanka by really talented individuals. So I manage, I'm responsible for an engineering team, who in turn is responsible for developing, maintaining, and enhancing some of these products.
Hi, my name is Shehan de Silva. I'm working with an organization called the Sri Lanka Institute for Nanotechnology. I've been with it since its inception about 5 to 6 years ago. Basically, the company, just to give a small background of it, it's R&D into nanotechnology. We thought this was important to get on this bus, essentially, as early as possible, because we don't have a lot of mineral resources in the country, but we do have high specific mineral resources, which are even more valuable in the nano when you sort of downgrade it to in size-wise. So basically, the company has two mandates. One is to help the private sector to enhance its competitiveness in the international space. The second is to add value to the local mineral resource space. So we're doing both of that. Personally, I'm involved in a plasma-based research, which is essentially the fourth state of matter, which, again, very important because we don't have a petrochemical industry. This is a sort of an electrical-based system to do chemical-like processing. Secondly, I'm involved in the strategic planning of basically trying to identify what areas we should be concentrating on going into the future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
I hope this message is giving you a good reason to smile. My name is Inoshini, and for something like Standard Chartered Bank, that's one of the four foreign banks based in Sri Lanka. I work with the best as an assistant director and relationship manager, handling mostly foreign clients. up with brick and mortar. So that's what I do now. It's in the retail space, so it's very different to what I've done before, but it's diversification of the portfolio, I suppose, in that sense as well.
Excellent. So if you can maybe get started, Inoshini, maybe we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about the thinking that brought you back to Sri Lanka in terms of what you saw as the opportunities or the reasons to come back.
So my main driver was to be close to home and to be close with family, and I always wanted to come back home. It was just a matter of when and how, and the timing was the only thing that wasn't decided, but eventually whatever said and done, for me, I knew I would end up being home. And I wanted to garner enough experience and enough transferable skills to come back home and bring whatever I gained and to translate it to something here. And for me, it was the timing as well, because it was post-war, and even in the banking space, that it's still, the journey is still starting. So I feel there's a lot of scope for us to come up with new ideas. There's no set trends. The rules and regulations haven't been set. So there's a lot of scope in the sense you have to figure it along as you go. Like there's no strict job description. You have to make it as you go along. So there's a lot of opportunity in that sense to bring back home what you have gained over the years and to make it something new, something of yours, and to expand on it. So I felt the timing was right, and I felt there was a vision to take the banking sector and the service sector to another level. So for me, it was definitely the timing, the opportunity as well. It was a bridging thing. I wouldn't have possibly gone into a different bank or a different area. I wanted a middle ground. That's why I chose an international bank to work with, just in case. But that being said, for me, my main driver still was on the personal grounds. But professionally, it helped me to have something on a solid base.
So basically, I always wanted to come back, right? There's nothing. There wasn't a sort of a point at which I looked back and said, I want to do it now. Now, the question was, though, I mean, this got a bit confusing when you spend the extended amount of time overseas. I did my undergrad and PhD, so I was clocking in about 8 years out of the country. So at that point, that ideal gets a bit hazy. But looking around, what I realized was that a lot of people either move back to whatever country, it doesn't need to be Sri Lanka, either at the front end of their career or at the very last end for retirement. Because when you try to do it in the middle, you sort of, the momentum you built up is lost. So I decided that the best choice for me to do that, it was to go at the front end and start my career here. That has a very good sort of a benefit to it in that Sri Lanka doesn't have the infrastructure, the basic infrastructure that we are used to in foreign countries. So it's up to us to build that. And that's exciting rather than having someone build that for you and just use it. We now know the ideal. So this is the empty canvas, right? So if you can have that sort of emerging market mentality where the jungle rules essentially, you will prosper here. So you need to sort of take a step back and think of the fact that there's nothing here. You will make of this as you will. So that's one of the principal outputs.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, to be honest, the decision to come back wasn't straightforward. It was a pretty hard decision, but I think because after living there, so I clocked about 11 years in total between the US and UK. And I mean, obviously with time, when you progress with family, you got kids, so it's not just about thinking about you anymore. It's just you think about your wife, your family, your kids, your education, etc. So the longer we stayed, the harder the decision was. But I mean, we really didn't want to settle down outside of Sri Lanka. But you know, I mean, first we went just a year to do my master's, then with Virtusa, I got transferred to Virtusa UK for 2 years. And there are opportunities that came up, okay, say we stay for another 2 years, 4 years, and they finally stayed there for, I think, over 9 years. Well, I think that the thought of not wanting to settle down outside of Sri Lanka was always kind of haunting us. So, and I think one reason for that is substance. This is what I want to call the substance in life, right? So, there's when you compare your life in say England or anywhere else and then Sri Lanka, there's a lot that you can relate to here in Sri Lanka. We lived in here for 20 odd years before moving out. You have from the sports to your family, friends, relations, activities going around, even the politics, even the big match. There's a lot that you can relate to, and that all kind of creates a lot of substance in life. And you and even after spending 9, 10, 11 years about, didn't feel that sense of belonging when we were over there. So I mean, even a recent example is you say someone like David Beckham or Andrew Strauss retiring from their sports profession. Compare that with Mahela Jayawardene and Sangakkara retiring. You really feel it. It's because we belong here, and there are our kind of heroes, our legends. Whereas David Beckham retires, who didn't really. So I think that was one of the reasons, right? So it's that really bringing that life is kind of much more fuller, especially if you're Sri Lankan and if you've grown up here. You just feel that more substance, jeevithayata harayak when you're over here. So, and the other reason was, for me, it was kids. And then again, when I say kids, again, education had a big part to play with it. When I say education, people tend to raise an eyebrow, because if you look at purely the academic aspect, the school curriculum, then I mean, undoubtedly, I think they would have got a better education in England. Right? But now my kids, the year we moved back, they were 8 and 4 when we started talking about this, deciding this. They were younger, 6, 2 maybe. So what my wife and I decided was education at that young age. It's more about the foundation. It's about setting the stage for them, for building their character, and it becomes more than the science and the mathematical concepts that you learn in school. It becomes more about values, more about religion, that sense of belonging, being with family, that community aspect, learning to deal with people, heritage. And there's a lot that we thought that they will probably gain more in Sri Lanka, being with the larger community and the relations. It can be quite tiring as well.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the other reasons that
we'll get to on the downside.
Yes.
The extended family. None of my family is in the audience, so I can get away with that. Beshan, any particular catalyst or a moment, or it seems because so far what we're hearing is it's been sort of a gradual thinking process, knowing at some point we're going to come back, that the timelines maybe getting a little extended. Similar, or was there a particular catalyst for you?
It's similar for me as well. It was really with younger kids, 4 and 3 and 4 at the time, the window to come back really closes on you when you have young kids, because once they start school there, it's very hard to get them out there and then replant them here. So, for me as well, like Shevan said, my wife and I had to really decide, if we were going to do this, we had to do this now and not later. And last year we did the trip with the 2 kids and the 2 dogs as well. So here we are.
Good. Yeah.
I have to be honest, it was the pole sandball. I really missed it, and that was basically it. No, I'm just kidding. But basically, for me, like, Sri Lanka has always been something, a place that I have, without any qualms, said I'm going back to. So when I was in London for university, I spent some time there as a child, and then went back for university, then came back, and I had this off and on relationship with London, and I think it was always a sort of grass is greener concept, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. But the fact is that professionally it was great, and I know we'll talk about that in a minute, but I always knew I wanted to go back. I think the issue was always whether it was the right time. And I think that professionally that was a question, but also personally, when you know where your family's at, where your your friends, everything you have, and so that point was not a definitive moment. But what did happen was, I'll never forget when the war ended. I was there, and I studied as a journalist, and I worked as a journalist at Associated Press during the ceasefire here, and then I was working at CNN, and then I left and said goodbye to media. No offense, but the fact was that suddenly I wasn't a part of home, and I think that really resonated with me. Because I was having to find out about how my country was doing through the BBC, and that didn't fly very well. And I think suddenly I also realized that there was a real need for moderate, educated, right-on people who had a really nice global view of the world from a Sri Lankan perspective to be here. Because otherwise, how is this country going to move forward? And I felt that London didn't really need me as much as I thought Sri Lanka did. I really hope it does still need me. So what we did was, my sister and I, we co-founded the festival together, and yes, that's always lovely and challenging. But what we did was we decided to do the festival in 2010 in December, just as on a whim, just to see whether it was viable. So we came down here a month and a half before, we panicked, we sweated, we cried, we did everything we could, and we got Roger Sanchez, who's a DJ, and we got 4 other bands, Duke Spirit, Trophy Wife, all these great bands, because I was working in music in London, and we got them to come, and we put it on at Paradise Beach in Mount Lavinia, and we were so excited. We totally overpriced the tickets, and we had a thunderstorm 15 minutes before we opened the doors. Come to Sri Lanka, it's great. Yeah, we were just like, what? But the fact was that it was a fantastic rite of passage, and what happened was we did have 800 people. It was fantastic. And it was a moment for us, and we suddenly realized, this is going to work. This is good. So I would say, in that thought process of coming back, we actually trialed something out, and it sort of worked. And that's what kind of helped us realize, okay, so 8 months later, I was on a plane moving back here.
Got it. Excellent. So, clearly each of you all saw different reasons, different opportunities, and some of it, as you mentioned, blank canvas. Come here and make your rules, figure it out. But at the same time, clearly in that thought process, you mentioned some of it being hard, you all made some trade-offs, both professionally, financially, personally. Can you, as much as possible, share some of those trade-offs, and in no particular order, but just to help, as people are struggling with some of the choices, what were some of the trade-offs that you all made, and how did you adjust? Having come here, because you recognize some of the trade-offs, how did you adjust to those trade-offs?
Before I moved, I worked for Intel. I was there for about 9 years. I was leading a hardware and firmware design team. Moving back, before I moved back, I talked to Harsha, who's the CEO of CodeGen, about what opportunities I have and what he wanted to do with expanding his company or getting into new things and so on. And he was interested in getting into electronics and hardware design and designing products, and that was very interesting for me. So in terms of trade-off, you obviously have to step down on your salary levels, because like what the first keynote speaker said, getting US salaries here is it's not for everybody, I guess. So that's a trade-off. Second is the job security, but I look back and think about job security, and Intel, for a company, they lay off hundreds of people sometimes from one particular site. Example, Arizona in last year. So job security isn't really security over there as well. And you take on more risks here, I guess, because it's new and you're getting into new fields and you're working with new people and young companies that haven't been there for a long time. So it's a trade-off, I guess. But security-wise, I think the same level of risk, and you look back.
I would say that the trade-off was. Working, as we all know, going out there and putting yourself out there, getting hired for the job you want, it's such a great moment for you personally. You've achieved something. And I think that for me in advertising and creative agencies, I worked in experiential, doing stunts and massive kind of brand campaigns for, MTV Europe Music Awards and Esprit and Agent Provocateur and Google and all kinds. But the point was that I was able to go out there and get hired, get fired, really just sort of reach a pinnacle where every moment of your success was your own. And I say this because my big trade-off has been, having done that for 8-9 years and working for one of my gurus of all time, I came back because my family is in advertising. My grandfather started the first ad agency in Sri Lanka in 1958, and my mother took it over in the early 90s. And I always felt like, okay, I'm not going to go back there. It's not a family business. It's like, you're obviously settling. But actually, I've gotten over it now, and I'm there. And it is very challenging. I'm sure for some of you, you have your family businesses or people who want to get involved, and you always wonder, what is that? And I think the trade-off has always been that freedom, that sense of like feeling like your achievement has been your own, because obviously I've come in and had to convince and prove again on several levels. I also think another trade-off is lifestyle, because obviously exposure, arts, culture for me was just like so fantastic being in London and anything on your doorstep. And now you really have to work hard to find the newness in your life here. It just means that you just have to really innovate more. And I would say also, maybe some people might agree, is that whole cultural process and anonymity and family and all those kinds of things. I think trade-offs in terms of having to settle and put up with certain things that maybe you wouldn't normally have to put up with.
You guys? Yep.
I think we touched upon this earlier as well, but I just want to deep dive into it. The false sense of stability that you get working for a large corporation, maybe in the US or the UK, I call it false because, you're expendable, right? At least over here, what you have is a sense of that facade is not there, in the sense that you make your own sort of journey, you make your own career. And this is far more realistic in that you don't necessarily have a structured method to go from Z to A, right? Or from the ground level to the top level. There is no structure, well, except for the top 1 or 2 tier companies. So you understand the dynamics of operating in the real world. And that's important because you might not get exposed to that in a developed economy, in a structured economy. Whereas and the developing economy is the majority in this world. You look at India, you look at China, you look at Africa, you look at South America, Russia. These are emerging economies. So the rules that they play by are the rules that we play by, right? What we are exposed to in our education, in whatever time we spend overseas, that's almost a sort of a false sense of security. So I think opening your eyes to what reality is in terms of how hard it is to get work done, we touched upon that in the keynote speeches. That's reality. The sooner we get to terms with that, the sooner we get to terms that we have to take ownership of our own destiny, I think it's better off for everyone. Yeah,
Actually, most of the trade-offs that I had to face were actually touched upon, from culture, the theatre, the lifestyle is something that I had to, in my mind at least, compromise, because I'd gotten used to a certain lifestyle, and like, my colleague said, just you could go to the theatre and you could go to the restaurants and you could have that kind of variety and diversity quite easily. But here, that was a limiting factor given the paycheck that you would get here. But that was a conscious decision that I made, that I had to think about it and frame my mind to accept that. And how I went about doing it was, there were so many other areas in my life where I was feeling a lot of deficiency in, I was feeling the sense of being far away from home, and I was feeling like I was missing out the good years of my parents. And that was one of the biggest drawing factors for me to come back home to. So for me, as much as there are places where I made lots of cutbacks, lots of, it's not necessarily a cutback because there are other things that compensate that, lacks in that area of your life. And so for me, I made a conscious decision, and that's how I went about kind of fulfilling that deficiency almost. because I used to be a big theatre buff, and I used to be able to, go to theatre almost every week, and it was something different. It was something that I would enjoy, and but here you don't really get that kind of variety in that space as well. So, but these are the little things. But when I take the big picture into consideration, I don't think I would change my mind given the pros and the cons that I had to deal with, because it has definitely overcompensated. Like from job security, like you were a small fish in a big pond. Yes, the dynamics you were exposed to, the kind of clients you dealt with, the kind of work you dealt with, or even the pace alone, you can't really compare here because the banking sector hasn't advanced, or it's just starting up in the true sense. We have very few products that we're working with. And we're trying to utilize them to the best of our ability, but the infrastructure is not in place for the new products to come into place. So there's a lot of things that need to get done before a certain product or a certain line of banking can get up to speed and actually come to a certain level where you can actually enjoy the merits of it. So because of this mismatch, because with the infrastructure not being in line or in tandem with where the products or where the things can go to, it kind of hampers your ability. Even if you want to do something, there are lots of regulations and rules and things that are stopping you from doing it. So that can be very frustrating in your day-to-day job. But that being said, every limitation is an opportunity. So you can kind of make it your own. You can try to, figure out a way to do the same thing or come up with the same kind of end product in a different way. But it's a journey, it's a challenge. But I think if someone's up for it, it's a good time to be in this space, because it's like someone just said, it's a hotbed of new ideas, and all it takes is, few people to propel it to a different level.
And as you say, you're helping to shape or create
You're
some
pretty
of that
much
landscape.
shaping, the shapers of what will define the banking sector in the future, or any sector in that sense, not just confining it to the finance industry.
To pick up on the thread, though, there might be folks who are, let's say, in specialized fields, and there's actually a couple of PhDs also on the panel, so you all have specialized in certain areas, spent significant amount of time working in some very specific technologies and areas. You're talking about it from a financial products and services, or even from a creative advertising field, serving global clients, challenging projects, being pushed to the max pace. How far behind, to put it sort of in a very bland way, how far behind are we in terms of technology or some of those opportunities? And again, it's in some sense a trade-off, but is it that large, or as you all are working on, you're working on an electric car that, is going to take Tesla on and hopefully zoom right past it. Are we that far behind, or what are those gaps and how are you all adjusting?
If I may, I don't think we are far behind. I think we have a talent pool here that is capable of doing world-class things, and with more and more people, you coming back to Sri Lanka, we could really change that more rapidly. We are back in terms of equipment, machinery and making precision tooling and whatnot. We are behind on that because nobody has invested money in that sector. But it's just investment there. But in terms of human capital and doing cool designs with electronics and hardware and firmware and software, we are way capable of doing that. And if somebody out there who's looking to invest in this area, we are capable of doing that, and we are actually capable of doing better than the others. For example, my Vega team, there's only 8 full-time staff. We have about 18 total with volunteers and interns working. When other car teams have taken 5 years to build a prototype, we are on track to build that in about 1.5 years. So, I mean, you can see how the capability of one example, and I think everybody here must be having more examples like that.
Yeah, let me just. It depends on the sort of industry that you're getting into. If you're talking about industrialization or the materials end of things, we are probably about 20 years behind everything else. But that's not to say that we can't be part of the new economy, right? The IT, the new manufacturing through additive manufacturing, those new economies are accessible, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel for the traditional economies that we have. And that's good, because the traditional economies depended on scale. The new economies do not depend on scale. The scale is essentially the internet, right? So it's using the internet, it's leveraging the internet as a force multiplier for these new economies. So we can be part of that, and that's good because it doesn't necessarily depend on a low-cost wage structure, right? So it's sustainable, inherently sustainable. So these are the reasons why I don't think it's a bad time to be in Sri Lanka right now, even with the hard science-based industries, scientific, IT. I think we can play a significant role in that.
I mean, I'd say we work with some of the largest brands in the country, and we've had to we have to be ahead of the game with them. We have to tell them where people are going to start spending, where people are going to want. Their wants are changing. The desires they have as individuals from technology. People want. I mean, if you think about just basic things like mobile, and the fact that mobile has completely changed the way that people are receiving information. And that is a really big deal, from the fisherman to the girl on the bus to work to your CEO. That is something that across the board people have been feeling. And I think for us, in terms of brands and getting people to have the things they want and be able to access them and making them appealing to them, you're almost pitching a specific lifestyle or a certain kind of approach to life. And I think that way we're not far behind. I think that we get caught up. Like, I have this continuous argument in my company with the board, because one side is like, digital, all it is about digital. And I'm like, yes, I totally agree. And now they're going to watch this and they're going to be like, oh my God, can't believe she's saying this. But the fact is that I personally believe, yes, true, but we're still behind on that, because a lot of brands are still spending traditionally. Because at the end of the day, if you look at the country as a whole, that your mass market is not necessarily looking at it like that. They are saying, how much is bread? How much is petrol? How much is this? How much is that? Can I send my kids to school? They're those kinds of things that concern them, and actually that urban community is growing. And I think that's very significant for all of us, because you've got a huge sense of migration. People are moving into the more suburban, urban areas, and that whole aspect of them leaving their communities is changing the way that they approach things. And I think that in itself, and the companies like MAS and Brandix and even Junkies, all these big companies have done a great deal. But you guys also doing, like, for me, I'm like sitting going, what the hell am I doing with these guys here on this table? But the point is that I don't think we're that far behind. I think we're a really great reflection of an emerging market or emerging market that are experiencing third world things, but with first world wants and materialistic aspects.
You mentioned starting out just this idea of, part of the reason of moving back is having a life that has more substance, in some sense, a richer life was one of the draws of coming back. Having moved back, outside of your work environment, have you all been able to engage in activities, passions, pastimes that have allowed that may have been, let's say, more challenging to do in a fast-paced environment? Yes, you had the theater to go to, but maybe other passions that you wanted to engage in that have been enabled because you've moved back. Has any of you experienced any of that, or some? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Because back home now, there are lots of options now coming up. Like, coming from theatre as well, there's now a lot of productions that are coming to Lionel Vent or to Nilum Pocono BMICH, and even the restaurants now, they're opening up various sorts and different sorts of cuisines, different pitches, different types, and it's been more social because there's a sense of home and community in Sri Lanka, whereas when you're abroad, there was a sense of you go to work, it's the same day, same thing. Your whole day is packed with work, and maybe you'll meet up with a very close knit of people, but that's about it. That's where it stopped. And it was very isolating in that sense. But back home, there's a greater sense of community. You meet this, especially in Colombo, there's a sense of, you're meeting people randomly at places, and that kind of binds them together and keeps you to, you feel like you're home. You feel like this is where you belong in that sense. Just from little things, being in Colombo. Just, you don't have to do like anything in particular, but just being in Colombo alone and just going randomly doing your grocery shopping will, you know, make you engage with someone. Whereas back home, you would just go to Sainsbury's, pick up something and come home. It's very isolating, very tunnel vision. It's sense of feeling drawn and kind of away from who you are almost.
Yeah.
So being back home has been great in that sense.
Good.
And
Yeah.
Just to add, like, I think one thing that's been really apparent to me is subcultures that are emerging here. In terms of, I mean, personally, like, I love to surf, and, you know, just starting to be able to do that. Couldn't do that in London. But what's really interesting is that all these subcultures that have popped up, and, you know, whether it's music and, you know, subgenres of music and really great pockets of activities that happens, you know, whether it's DJs and, you know, amazing parties on the beach, or whether it's, you know, design markets that I've just become a part of, which is a great Colombo design market, which is all about getting designers and artists and performers and musicians to come and collaborate, you know, and then you hear about these amazing people who have just, you know, made their journeys here and who just want to be here and be a part of something bigger than themselves. And then, you know, I actually had heard about his project from before, and he's like, yeah, I'm just building the electric car, and I'm like, you're the guy. And it's just amazing. You hear about all these things, and I think that's really key. For anybody who's thinking that it's just straight up obvious stuff, it's not. It is very much, you know, a hugely diverse community of people that are doing very interesting things. And that, I think, reflects the fact that it's a lot to do with people who've come back, but it's also those people who've been really wanting that chance to expand and have exposure, who maybe never had that chance to go abroad, but now they've found like-minded people to work with. And I think that everything that we do for ourselves, or we think it's for ourselves, is actually going to have some sort of positive effect on people here, on ourselves, on friends, or family, or work people. So, yeah.
Okay. And like to your point, you know, some of these subcultures may not be readily apparent. You need to engage and sort of find some of these pockets that relate to you. Just in terms of being engaged with the community, having time for outside activities and giving back, or engage any sort of opportunities that you felt opened up. Because the challenge is you're building organizations here, you've taken on more roles than you would have probably if you were there. But at the same time, Shevan, have you felt any?
I think it's the, you know, the whole social aspect here, as you said, touching upon this whole extended family as well, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you just compare, you know, a typical week or the weekend back in England, right? So, I mean, you do have a good time with your work colleagues, but it maybe just go for the pub lunch or a drink in the afternoon, and then that's it. And then weekend you then meet up with someone else, but you know that you don't feel that bond with people. Whereas when you come back here, you still meet up with people who you worked with 15 years ago, or you went to school with 25 years ago. And then I mean, you get invited to all these dinners, weddings, homecomings, engagements, birthday parties, funerals, yeah. And just people just throw parties randomly, right?
Yeah.
Which without any reason. But I mean, it, as I said earlier, it can be very tiring. But at the same time, it just, life feels more fuller when you kind of, you know, meet up, do a bit of gossip, and yeah. So.
I think I take a different view to what we've been discussing. It's certainly fuller. I'm wondering whether it's too full, because what I realized is when I was overseas, I had a lot of time for personal growth, right, in areas that I wanted to grow in, right? And I find that we don't have the time for that over here. And these are commitments we really can't say no to. It's close family, friends, and you don't want to say no to it, because that's you want to be a part of that sort of the community. So I think it's important to strike a balance between personal growth, because that's something, if you're away for an extended time, you find that, okay, you do have your pockets of friends overseas, but at the same time, you have so many diverse sort of stimuli coming at you, from the different comedy clubs to hobbies to whatever it is, right? So you won't get that same intensity over here. you're not going to do that. You're not going to get that sort of volume of hobbies or clubs or whatever it is. And it's up to you to get that stimuli for growth. You need to actively seek out these things, carve out a few hours every day or every week or whatever it is, because without that, that growth that you saw when you were away is going to stagnate. You're going to bring that back. Okay, 10 years down the line, when you look back at yourself, that is the only thing you have, right? And that's not good. I mean, I'm speaking from the point of view of a scientist, because for us, we just can't do that. We'll be irrelevant in a year. But so what that gave me was an insight into the fact that we need to carve out this time. And in Sri Lanka, it's very hard to do that. So I implore you to do that. Otherwise, you'll just retain the knowledge base that you came down with.
I think that's a very fair point. The biggest challenge when you're used to certain space, personal space, time for yourself, for your family, and here family is a big F family, so you've got everybody involved. So the challenge is, how do you, without annoying, particularly as you come back, either you embrace all family and you go for everything and you suddenly realize you've no time for yourself, or you start trying to compartmentalize, and then people say, oh, too hoity-toity to come for this cousin's one, but you went for that one. So, but it's a genuine problem because you keep meeting in these circles, so how do you find that balance? I think that's a genuine one to grapple with. Let me end with one question, and then I'd like to open it up to the audience as well. Having come back, a bunch of you, maybe a couple of years under your belt, some of you, many more years under your belt, having come back, is there anything you would do differently in hindsight? Thinking about it, planning for it, anticipating, anything that you would say, yeah, you know what, I wish we'd done a little bit more of something before coming back?
I actually wish that I had come here and spent a month or month and a half just scoping out the situation without actually packing my bags and my flat and everything, just getting on a plane and coming here and then going, oh, but actually, if I had a chance, to sit there and look at it and go, okay, these are the job opportunities. This is where I might live. I don't have children, so I wasn't worried about school. But also looking at, the sort of lifestyle that we might end up having to get into. Actually, my husband is a product designer, and there are no real kind of set up product design consultancies here. And, he came here and he's like, I want to product design. And they're like, you want to do what exactly? And it's like, he had to introduce this entire thing. And, that was extreme challenge, huge pressure on, obviously, the relationship and just generally, how we were going to make that work. And so I think if I had done anything differently, I would have come here first, spent a month, and worked it out first and said, okay, fine, I got the information I need, and then gone back.
But, definitely, I can relate to that as well, especially coming with a family. You have to make your family settle down as well, and I think it's very important that all of them, the wife, the kids, and dogs in my case, has that fair chance of, looking at the whole picture, identifying where they can, be part of the society and help out and, have, strong values as well. So in that sense, it would have been great if we took like 3-4 months extended leave or whatever, come down here, work for a few months, see how it all, pans out, and then kind of go that way. Otherwise, you're just jumping into the deep end and then, trying to learn how to swim, while the shark's are eating it.
I think for me, I think so we tried to make this decision a few years ago actually, and I was heavily discouraged because I kind of went around at the time. I just asking people, what do you think? Is it a good time to go? Is it should I come now? Will there be good opportunities? But then the feedback you get from people both here and there, you tend to be very happy when someone kind of encourages you, but at the same time there is a lot of discouragement as well. From even comments like, why do you want to go back to that God forbidden country? I've heard that literally. So you can get discouraged when you especially talk to people and ask for opinions. But I think what I learned from that is that I need to figure out for myself, because my personal circumstances will be very different to everyone else, right? So even a good friend or a relative. So so the last I think probably last 18 months, I actually made 2 trips to Sri Lanka. I spoke to potential employers. I looked at what my potential earnings would be, what schools are going to be like, just see what traffic is like, what cost of living is like. And that 500, 600 pounds that I paid on a plane ticket was, I think, probably the best investment I made in terms of this decision to come back, because I then got information firsthand for myself.
Yeah.
Rather than relying, it's good to talk to people and kind of see what's going on, but I mean, asking opinions is probably
Not a good.
because I mean, personal circumstances again. I mean, some people have gone through bad patches. I mean, again, based on their personal circumstances. But you need to figure out it for yourself, and it should be a personal decision.
Shehan?
Going back to the person of circumstances sort of trend of thought, I think to be in a place like Sri Lanka, you need to be of the mindset of I'll do the best from what I have. So I don't have any regrets in that because I think like all of us, we saw the fact that we had a dire need to go back. We took it, and after that you make of it as you will, right? Because you can't live in the past and thinking what if. So I think all of us took that plunge, and I think it's time for the next bunch of...
And to draw that line of stop comparing.
Exactly.
You know,
it's
just come
it's a
here, you're on the ground.
counterproductive activity.
Yeah. Inoshini, to wrap it up? Yeah.
Same for me, actually. I think you just have to make the best out of the opportunity here. Whatever you're given, you just have to go with it, make the best out of it. And given my personality, I'm glad the way things panned out for me, because I tend to overthink and overcomplicate things. So the way it happened was the best way, for me. And I don't regret the decision in any way or form. And now that I'm here, I'm trying to do the best I can. And it's a rewarding experience because it's challenging, it's nice, and it's a journey. And wherever you are, you have to just, make the best out of it. So that's what I'm trying to do.
No, and I think it's an interesting, if you folks who made the transition quickly and just got on a plane and came here, look back and say, I wish I'd planned and thought a little bit more and eased the transition. But maybe that may have, if you had been here for 3 months and tried something, it may not have worked the same way you'd like. So in one sense, getting on the ground, burning the ships, burning the bridges, and saying, I'm here might work for some people. Others would want to, as you said, particularly with family, with the broader context, come a few times, ease into the process, really figure out the culture and the subculture of what it means to come back, and then really make the call. So, yeah.
If you kind of know you eventually want to end up in Sri Lanka, it's a matter of just biting the bullet almost. Because otherwise you're here nor there. Like while you're there, you're thinking you want to be here and really not making the most out of it, in the sense that the grass is always greener on the other side. So sometimes, you get these opportunities and these catalysts that make you want to, make you decide, and you kind of stick with it and do the best you can.
I think it's also really important to know who you are when you come here, when you make this decision, because that is fundamental, that will get challenged constantly from all sides, whether it's work or family or old friends, new friends. It's really about knowing who you are and keeping your hand in that international pocket, so to speak. So while I've been back here, I've made it a point where I can, and where my budget affords me, to travel and to try and keep that door open so that I can actually still see the world. Just because I'm here doesn't mean I have to shut the door, because at the end of the day, we're all global citizens. Sri Lankans are everywhere, and wherever you go, there's always someone who knows some Sri Lankan. And you're like, yeah, that's right, because we like to go out there and we want to be a part of it. We want to see the bigger picture. So keep that energy. That's really important also, because that will keep you fresh, and you will then make that freshness somehow impacted in what you're doing locally.
Very good. Good point. We'd like to open up to questions. I think there should be a couple of mics floating if anyone has questions.
Morning. Thank you very much. Rather enjoyed your conversation. I just wanted to know, how many of you are dual citizens, and has immigration been an issue for any one of you when you returned to Sri Lanka?
What was the question?
Any dual citizens, and has immigration been an issue in returning to Sri Lanka?
I'm not a dual citizen, but immigration has been a issue for me because I am on a work visa, and dual citizenship is stopped right now for various reasons. But that is a problem, and I've spoken to a lot of people, overseas who are looking for that status to come back because you want that security and the benefits that come with it. So I think this should be a clear, a request for the government to get started on this, because there are a lot of people who are waiting to come back and not doing so just because of this issue.
Thank you, everyone. My question today, I think it's more relevant to everyone here, everyone who's employed overseas. My question is, now, when you're transferring your experience from foreign employment, foreign companies to here, for an example, myself, I have like solid experience in Melbourne for a couple of years, but I don't have any Sri Lankan experience. So one thing I faced in Melbourne is that when you want to get employed in the country, all the companies are looking for local experience. Even if you are a superstar in a different country, Australian companies look for local experience. I'm just asking whether that's the same situation here. So if, for an example, if I migrate back here, do I have to compete? Obviously, I do have to compete with local people here, local graduates, local people with experience. But still, the companies look just for local experience, or will they value my foreign experience as well?
Just from an advertising kind of creative agency point of view, and even brands, for us, foreign talent is a godsend, because no offense again to the local market, sorry, but the idea is that sort of work ethic and that insight of regional or even Australian, for example, in your case, would be very welcome. I think yes, there is a need to, from a language perspective, to be able to at least converse or understand to an extent, but also it's about just having an awareness for where Sri Lanka is at. That's not hard to do though. All you got to do is come here and basically meet with people and go to the chamber or whatever, and try and orientate yourself with what is currently the status in the country. But I would say that yes, there's a local awareness that needs to be there, but I wouldn't say that it's a compulsory to be able to come and be employed. I think they would welcome you.
Okay. What about in terms of IT industry?
If I'm so I think most of the companies in Sri Lanka now, technology companies, software engineering companies, they all compete on a global scale, right? So there is very little need for local experience from that perspective. Definitely having that exposure to a foreign country, dealing with Europeans, Americans, etc., and especially from Sri Lanka, if you are to deal with on a global scale, definitely you can bring a lot of skills in terms of the communication, coordination, working with customers, understanding the context. That will really help. But if you're looking from a purely technology perspective, then you'll be competing with some amazing talent that's in Sri Lanka as well. For example, for me personally, an area that really exceeded my expectations is the technology talent that's available now in Sri Lanka compared to probably 10-15 years ago, because through WSO2 I've had the opportunity to visit universities, University of Jaffna, University of Moderator, IIT, and also on a kind of weekly basis I interview would-be software engineers, right, from various parts of various universities. And it's amazing to see some of the work that these guys have done. At the age of 23, 24, some of them have had a hand as a startup. They've participated in so many hackathons. They've gone for Google Summer of Code campaign programs. And for example, University of Moderator, I think, has been consistently ranked within the top 3 or 5 for Google Summer of Code over the last few years. And just last week, I met a individual again from university who has participated in this IEEE programming global competition. For the last 5 years, he has been ranked in the top 50. So likewise, and there are people who have patents under their name, they've presented at so many conferences, research papers, etc. And they've kind of built a real brand for themselves. I'm not saying it's everyone, but there's a lot of them out there now. So there's, in that form, the local talent is also kind of globalized.
If I may jump in, I think the trap that you should avoid is that just because you lived overseas and you are looking for a job here, don't be all of that, right? Be humble, talk about what you did, and most importantly, how you did it, it's not the Java or whatever code that you wrote, it's how those companies in the US or wherever, how did they, go by doing it? What was their, processes like? How did they do QA? How did they do, code analysis or planning or, cost factoring? Stuff like that is not up to par. Yes, the thinking process around, actually developing a product, that is what's important, and that's the value that you guys have. That that you can bring in and compete with the local talent here.
Just to add to that, I think the other thing to think about is which companies in Sri Lanka would value or have a premium on foreign exposure versus other companies that if they're serving the local market predominantly, they may not value the foreign exposure as much as having somebody who understands very much the local nuances. So again, you talked about IT, the knowledge sector. For example, at Stax consulting firm, our team is probably 50-50 homegrown, never been out, versus about half the team who's been out and come back. And actually, we do need that blend. Or we find, blending those two experience sets is really what helps us serve both clients outside of Sri Lanka and then clients locally as well. Because serving clients locally, you need to understand the nuances. When you're going to speak to, business leaders locally, they want to make sure whoever's coming understands their context and situation and has some local experience. When we're serving regional or global clients, they prefer to know that they're also dealing with folks they can relate to or who can actually relate to their concerns and situations. So you also need to look for sectors and companies that might value that experience, the global exposure more than others.
Looking at it from the other side, I'm in human resources, and obviously we're looking to hire people from people who've come back with the exposure. What has been kind of the greatest challenge for each of you in integrating or the culture shock in the workplace, working abroad versus working in Sri Lanka? Or has there been a difference?
If I may jump into that. I think the local context, because I work in a place where we blended the private sector with the government, with academia. So it's got a very, very unique, how should I say, flavor to it. So to understand that takes time. That takes a lot of time, and given your own industry, I think it'll take either more or less time than that. But you need to understand that, otherwise you're not going to be effective.
Inoshini, you talked about sort of a mid-landing in terms of coming into a global bank that was in Sri Lanka as a means of transitioning.
Yeah.
Is that that was part of your thinking as well?
That was definitely part of my thinking process, and even within the international bank, there's quite a mix. There's few people who come from abroad, and there's an equal number who've graduated from Sri Lanka, and the exposure and the clients you have to deal with are of different walks almost. So you have to adapt. You have to be flexible in terms of you can't expect the same level of professionalism or the same level of work ethic from your colleagues or from the clients you engage with. So you kind of have to. It's an open blank. It's a open canvas that you have to work with. So you have to have that mind frame when you come here. Almost expect nothing, then you can kind of work with it. That's, I think, the best approach to come into Sri Lanka and working here. Because invariably you will find there are lots of problems you face with the level of expectation. That's, I think, the biggest problem. Because you would think that something will get done, or when they say they keep to a certain timeline, that it'll actually happen at that time. But that doesn't really happen. So you have to kind of adjust as you go along.
I think for me it was a massive, the lack of value to ideas. Excuse me. But the whole, the fact that going and giving original ideas or having that level of respect for what you're putting out there. I think that was very difficult because in my industry, ideas are basically our currency. And we're sitting there thinking about things in strategic ways of approaching people for brands, and we find it so difficult from a client's perspective to actually respect that and give that value. And I think coming from abroad, suddenly you're coming back and you're thinking, well, of course they're going to give that. They're going to respect what we do. And it's not really like that. And I think that's one thing. And I always think about whenever you drive on Gall Road or wherever and you see, a little, like a beauty salon and it's got Angelina Jolie's face on it, and you think, see, that's like, it's sort of that first world want, the third world treatment, no insult, but do you know what I mean? It's really interesting how, that's the way they approach it. They're like, that's what I'm pitching myself, even though it's not really like that, and I won't, necessarily pay for that. And you're like, okay. So I think that for me is always quite definitive because it makes me realize that we have a ways to go in that sense. And it is challenging when you have so many aspirations. You come in with so many ideas and your code of conduct or the way you run your business or, why won't people read their emails? It's like really simple things. People say, I don't read your emails. And you're like, why? I mean, my God, and they don't, and they think it's completely fine. Whereas I would totally get fired if I did that in London. So I think that kind of thing has been a massive shock. And you get told by people who are very senior, they're like, why are you going on about process? And you're like, well, why wouldn't you? So I think that again, it's just something, but we have to stick hard and fast. I think that's the only thing. It's sort of like that rebellion thing that happens within you. You're like, yeah, you know what? Fine, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to keep doing it. You're going to like my Excel sheets one day.
We have, I think, time for one more question. So there.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes. Yes, my name is Milroy. I am from Australia. I came on a holiday here, and I noted this work in Sri Lanka, the seminar in the internet. Then I thought of just coming for the curiosity to find out what sort of opportunities that I can make. Over the last 25 years, I was in Australia. In the meantime, I came back to Sri Lanka and lived in Sri Lanka and worked for Sri Lanka for 8 years, and then went back to Australia. This question might not be directly relevant to this panel, but to the organizers, right? Because we are talking here about the business development, coming here and permanently settling down here in the business field. And also we are talking about this technology transfer. The question for me is for actually the government sector. The government sector involvement in promoting the people to get them in and get the technology transfer happening in that area. I'm a civil engineer and I'm a team leader now, and there are a lot of Sri Lankan engineers working who has got the free education in this country, and they have the desire to come here, and they have the opportunity to come here as well. Because a lot of the international companies who are operating here, especially in the highway sector and in the building industries, they operate with the expatriates who are coming from overseas. But as an say for example, I myself, when I wanted to come here previously, what they say is, yes, you are qualified and you can go. We can nominate you as an expatriate, which should be paid in dollars, more than what I get in Melbourne now. But the question is that I can recommend to you any place other than Sri Lanka. And what's the reason behind that? And because in Sri Lanka, when I put your name as a Sri Lankan Australian, and then there is a tendency to reject you. And it's not only for Sri Lanka, it's even for Indians or any other countries. Indians in other countries, their applications are switched off, or they do not consider as an expatriate. But with respect to the technology transfer, there's a lot of knowledge that we can put into the country. Now you were talking about the job security, right? When you are taking the risk of having a business here and getting the job security and all the other insecurities, with those type of jobs, there is no problem with the job securities, because they are giving it that opportunity on contract basis for 1 year or 2 year or that sort of stuff. But in terms of the technology transfer and work in Sri Lanka, it would have a huge impact into the country. And I want to ask that question not from this panel, because you are in the private sector, by the organizers if possible, and what sort of things this organization can do in terms of promoting and getting that recognition, so that a lot of people would come here and serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want? Sorry. Oh, I think we're out of time. Just on that, I think there's the panel that follows brings in some public sector views on some of the challenges and some of the trade-offs. And I think what you're talking about is maybe is there a way to formalize and bring experienced Sri Lankan technical folk back into the country through government programs and help them contribute back into the economy as opposed to as expat, bringing. So I think that's a good question probably to raise with that second panel that's coming up. We are, I'm sorry, out of time. I know there were a couple of questions. You add to that? Okay.
To be honest, I'm not employed here. I have my own company. I'm into IT. All right. The thing is that our country is not ready to go for the change. I see it at the ground level.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's not true. There's a lot of companies out here that are ready to change, who are looking for the expertise to change, and they've been starving for that one person or the group to come and do something new, and that is not true.
The reason why I say that is that, like looking into technology, I'm trying to make it quick, right? Looking into technology, like many countries work on a home-based VPN solution, right? But in Sri Lanka, if you take one of our biggest industries is apparel manufacturing companies, and they have factories all over the country, right? So now the network providers, they will not, because we have products like Sonic Wall, things like that, which give a in-house VPN experience. But in this part of in Sri Lanka, the thing is that the network provider, they provide it on this one. Like they give a MPLS line or something. I'm getting into more technical, right? So that is the point. We are not, I have approached many factories, many government factories. They're saying we are not, because the network doesn't support. I mean, I'm going very on, I don't think I'm going more on an isolated case, but the issue is they're not ready to move on that technological advancement, because this old technology is giving the more financial income to them, to the providers, rather than, but it's not giving a good value for money to the manufacturing or the factories or companies which have other branches all over the country, right? I've approached many factories, but they were obviously everyone wants to reduce costs, no doubt about that. But nobody is ready to take that step just because they don't want to get out of the comfort zone. You know what I mean?
And just to end on that, I think the element though is it's going to be, you're going to see different levels of technology adoption and willingness to change, and there are companies within apparel who are investing, not necessarily in networking solutions, but possibly in cutting-edge technologies, because they have squeezed out the maximum efficiencies that they can up to this point, and they recognize that the next layer has to be investments in technology. So it is happening, but not maybe in some of the particular areas you are talking about in terms of connectivity, but at least in terms of efficiency gains, productivity gains, those investments.
That's because the network provider doesn't want you to go to that side.
Sure,
He loses all
sure. So those are some of the local nuances of, when you start knocking on those doors, you start
that's where we are stuck.
Yeah, great. I think we do need to wrap up now. Thanks everyone for the discussion and showing up this morning. Appreciate it. Thank you.